my recommendation or my suggestion would be, I think, if we are going to help in promoting the integration mechanisms in Africa, the idea should be working through the RECs, selected RECs in specific agricultural products. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for him, please. Thank you so much. And we thank you also for the background that you provided us, which was also very, very important. Now, before I talk to our last panelist, I want to turn to the private sector a bit. Here, we want Mr. Stephen Ruzibiza, if I pronounce it wrongly, please pardon me. We'll be talking about these value chains. A number of panelists have mentioned it. And we think the private sector will be in a very good position to enlighten us on the details or nitty-gritty of what can be done to add value, to do agro-processing, agribusiness, so that, especially with the similarity in structure of production, we can avoid the present situation where you produce and you don't find a buyer, or you have to buy what you cannot produce within from outside the continent. Because if you have the commodities processed within, and it probably will have to reduce the price that you have to pay. Apart from what the Honorable Minister mentioned in terms of selling cheaper far because of the transport situation that
missing the value chain contributions. But one of the issues or contribution which I think we should have to improve on if we are to improve value chain investments is incentives. We need things like insurance. For example, we don't have many agro-insurance products. People are a bit hesitant when it comes to insuring agriculture aspects. They don't want to go into that area. And it is really a big issue because we depend on natural calamities, resources. We are depending on rain season. When the rain is too much, then the produce goes bad. When the dry season comes heavy, then the produce go bad, animals die, disease comes in, and we don't have all this aspect. Then all of a sudden you will hear the donations, and the ships at the ports will be offloading, and the products are coming from all over the world to support Africa. So one of the things for us, to, for example, to invest in the value chains, we need both physical infrastructure, soft infrastructure, and hard infrastructure. For example, where do we get the post-harvest facilities? Across the borders, if we are going to encourage cross-border trade. And that is the only way we can help in terms of integration. We have very few. If, for instance, I pick one country, you forgive me if it is mentioned, but I'm not doing it in bad faith. If you are going to go via Congo River to Kinshasa, it will take you around 12 minutes by boat. But around those, the shores of the river, you will not find those heavy facilities that would help the storage when you're crossing the two countries. But if you go to San Francisco and you are going to cross over to Auckland, 15 minutes, same system of transport, you will find all those things there. And when anything happens along corridor Congo and Kinshasa, then of course you expect the facilities to come from that far to help us. In Africa, we have tried to see some aspects have worked. For example, Congo, DRC, and Rwanda, they have helped with the assistance of COMESA to ease the movement of products less than $2,000 to move free of tax. Once you bring those kind of incentives, then people are ready to invest in the value chain perspective, the storage, fertilizers, production processes, machines, because they can see the flow of goods, they can see there is a move of products, and you end up finding those investments in that kind of areas. Again, we need to encourage governments. They need to encourage partnerships between the countries. Partnerships in the sense of research, partnerships in the areas of production, infrastructure, and financing. Because it is not that easy, for example, to have seen the local banks may not have that potential, or even they may have risk averse to invest in agriculture. But if different banks syndicated amongst themselves and invest in this kind of value chain productions, be it finance, be it technology, how do you preserve your produces for a long time? To cater for the future use. Those are some of the things which I think the private sector or even the governments can do it. Then government has to take a big step and de-risk the sector of agriculture. Do what it takes to create a conducive environment. Because private sector is going to invest with the purpose of getting returns on investment. But to create that confidence, government has to do kind of a test. Let's de-risk the area, de-risk the sector. Then at a certain stage, you can privatize the infrastructure that all the developments we have done. That way, I think that is how you can create a leverage over the process. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Because for us in the African Development Bank, we've been looking at the value chains. And for us, agriculture is key, not only for the fact that it promotes growth, but it provides more than 70% of employment in most of our countries. And we think that agriculture is key, and that is why we have Feed Africa as one of our high 5 priorities. And in doing that, we think that agro-processing is key. And some of the insights you have given us now will be very, very important in implementing that. Let me turn to our last panelist to ask him on issues he thinks are lessons we can learn from nations within the region and outside the region in promoting intra-African food trade. I want to turn to our friend Mingasha Tades to enlighten us.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. The point I would like to emphasize is on the need for making measures that limit import and exportation of agricultural products, and the need for making the measures more predictable and more transparent. As you all know, there are a number of reasons for the governments to put in place measures that limits the importation and exportation of agricultural products. What we see in the rest of the continent, in the rest of the world, is that when those governments put those kind of measures that limit the importation and exportation of food, is that when they put those measures, they have a clear policy procedures and processes for imposing those measures, for administrating those measures, and lifting those measures. But what we see in the continent is that when governments put measures that limit the importation and exportation of food, they do it so in an ad hoc manner, and in a non-transparent manner, and a non-predictable manner, which make it very difficult for the private sector to make an informed planting and marketing decisions. To expand on this, I can give an example of export bans. If you see around the continent, when government take a policy measure banning the export of agricultural products, they don't have a system for consulting private sector why these kind of measures are necessary. When these measures are taken, they are not properly communicated to the stakeholders, including the private sector, and there is no also timelines for this kind of measures. And therefore, it's very difficult for private sector to hold governments accountable that the reason for putting those measures in the first place is not there, so the government has to lift those measures. And the other important issue here is there is no coordination among government agencies when this kind of measures are taken. You have the Minister of Agriculture pushing for production and productivity, and in the middle of that, you have the Minister of Trade putting export ban or import ban measures. So there is no coherence of policies among government agencies that make it very difficult for the private sector to make an informed marketing and planting decisions. Therefore, there is a need learning from other countries' experience. When African governments put in place measures that limit importation and exportation of food, they should do it in a more transparent manner and in a more predictable manner. When they impose those measures, when they administer those measures, when they lift those measures. And there is also a need for to have a neutral voice within these countries that advocate for governments to put measures that encourage cross-border agricultural trade. What we see in the continent is actors outside the continent advising governments that taking XYZ measures is not in the best interest of those countries. But if we have a coalition of national, neutral, national voices that advocate for a more transparent and predictable policy systems, we can go a long way in terms of encouraging cross-border trade in agricultural products. Let me stop there.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think we've made a lot of progress. We've addressed most of the issues. And I think it will be very, thank you very much. It will be very important to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions, comments, but I want to remind us that we do not have all the time in the world. Limit your question to one. Just introduce yourself, your question, your comment. If it is comment, just one. And then so that we can go around. And when I say one, it means that maximum of 1 minute for each person. I want to go from this way and then go like this. I hope the mics are available. I can see a hand up there. You can address your question to any specific panel member. That will be easier so that we know who will respond to you.
Okay, thank you. But I'll proceed in French. Le panel se concentre essentiellement sur l'intégration de l'économie africaine. Mais moi, je pense que la question est plus globale. Est-ce que finalement, Ce que nous devons régler, ce n'est pas plutôt l'intégration de l'économie africaine dans l'économie mondiale d'abord. Parce que ce qui se passe, c'est que nous avons construit une Afrique qui a des infrastructures qui sont positionnées pour les cultures qui nourrissent essentiellement les autres continents. Et nous l'avons fait depuis la colonisation jusqu'aux indépendances et aujourd'hui jusqu'en 2018. Maintenant, nous demandons à ce que ces pays transforment leur modèle de production pour se tourner vers les besoins des pays. Donc, je pense que ça va nous prendre encore beaucoup de temps. Mais l'idée que je voudrais apporter dans ce débat, c'est de dire finalement que nous devons d'abord réfléchir collectivement comment nous intégrons l'économie africaine à l'économie mondiale. Et en ce moment, je ne parlerai pas de politique agricole de pays, mais je parlerai plutôt de politique agricole africaine, dans lequel nous arrivons à harmoniser l'ensemble des capacités des pays à produire des produits et des biens et services pour l'extérieur. Et en ce moment, nous arrivons à nous spécialiser sur les biens sur lesquels nous pouvons échanger entre nous, États. Donc, moi, je pense que ça va être très difficile de dire que nous allons ramener tous les 50 milliards dans l'économie africaine, parce que ça va nous coûter 2 fois plus cher. Nous dégradons en ce moment le bien-être des populations. Mais nous pouvons réfléchir collectivement sur l'intégration de l'économie africaine dans l'économie mondiale. Donc, je voudrais avoir la réaction du panel sur la politique agricole africaine et surtout que la ministre rwandaise est là. J'aimerais qu'elle se prononce sur cette question. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. S'il vous plaît, just from now, introduce yourself and, as we said, limit yourself to just 1 minute.
Donc, c'est M. Akaya, je suis le conseiller économique et financier du Premier ministre togolais.
Très bien, merci beaucoup. Okay, I can see a hand here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I am Aziz Musiba Olumuyiwa. I'm Director, Ag Business Processing and Marketing in the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, Nigeria. I want to appreciate all the speakers, and I feel what we'll be talking about should be the next level. And to get to the next level, having tried to harvest all the contribution, I feel this is the way to go. For example, the moderator mentioned at the beginning of the day that we have the Malabo, we have the Maputo, we have the Abujas, we have the Kigali, we have so many declarations, and yet we are still being stopped by the inertia. We are not moving forward. The work in progress is still 0. And to be able to move forward, I think what we should be doing and what we should be thinking after this conference should be: 1, we set targets. 2, we allocate responsibilities. You are supposed to construct social road linking social country, between social country. You are supposed to do this. We get facility if we need to get from development partner, from any other, and how to do it. We monitor the progress, we set deliverable targets, then we report progress. We limit importation of food, and this is where I want to zero in, like somebody mentioned. Nigeria made it because we're spending a lot of money on the importation of rice. And I want to say openly now, that is no longer the business as usual. We have successfully reduced importation of rice into the country by 95%. What we are currently having is smuggling, and which we are trying to stop. A lot of rice are being imported to Republic of Benin, and Republic of Benin doesn't eat long grain parboiled rice. You know that most of these rice that are being deposited in the Republic of Benin are meant for Nigeria, and we are having over 3,000 routes, which makes it difficult for our custom to stop. To stop this, we are also trying to look at policy way of stopping this. You asked, where are the examples? The best practice, where we have done it. We've done it in Nigeria. The issue of ECOWAS. We are currently having regional reserve stocks in Nigeria. Nigeria is keeping full reserve stock for all the West African countries, and they are contributing to it, and it's working. This is the beginning. We need to look at examples all over Africa and copy it. This is the only one forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maiwa. I can see a lady's hand in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Crystal Simeoni, Head of Advocacy at FemNet. My question goes to the Minister from Rwanda. Women produce 80% of food from the African continent, and the statistics are not very far from the same in Rwanda. With women not having access and ownership of land, I'm wondering if your government has targeted policies towards this. Without access, without ownership, it means that women can't apply for meaningful credit, which means they can't expand, which locks them into smallholder farming, which is not sustainable. So I'm wondering what policies your government has.
Any other one? I'm going like this. Okay, Professor Ajakai.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Olu Ajakaye from Nigeria. Now, population will double in the next few years, and land will be required for housing this population. Do we have experience from, say, Rwanda on the land use planning initiative to preserve arable land? Because the reality of the matter is urbanization actually encroaches on arable land. So what are we going to do when we have this population that doubled and the urban area, as mentioned by Paul yesterday, will grow, but then the land area is not expanding? So how do we cope with that challenge for food security? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Going like this. I guess, okay, I can see another lady's hand here.
Thank you. I am Pratima Pietam from the government of Mauritius. I work as a phytosanitary expert in the trade sector. Okay, so actually I don't have a question, it's a reflection regarding the quality and productivity. So I'm sure while we're talking about food value chain and we are talking about productivity and trade, so there is one very important element that we all should consider, that it's like food that is being produced, but what is the percentage that is being produced and that is being marketed? So I'm sure we have been talking about SPS issues, and these are very important consideration in production level, where a lot is being wasted due to non-consideration of SPS issues. So it's a reflection that I would like all the panelists to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. I think I should have last two questions here very quickly. So we have 2 minutes there. 1 minute each.
Thank you, sir. My name is Asuvak Parai from Ministry of Budget and National Planning in Nigeria. I work with the Economic Growth Department. The issues being discussed, agri, integration, and all, there's one common factor that I see affects them, and that is the issue of logistics and transportation. I want to think if all Africans that are here agree to say we run a west to east rail line from Dakar to Mombasa, then link north-south, 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 who basically address this issue. Road construction, road networking, that have been on the agenda for some time, but you know, because of our kind of climatic and seasonal situation, rains and all that, the road part is not working too well. But I want to suggest that we start looking ahead and looking at this rail networking. And by and large, that one will reduce the encumbrance that we're having with respect to logistics and transportation. Thank you, sir.
Last question here.
I'm Sunday Fayoshi from the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply Management, Nigeria. My concern is this. It's very good to learn that Nigeria now has reserves, both for emergency and intervention. But the new development of the issue of insurgency, where insurgents are driving away farmers from their farm and their habitat, might eventually lead to the erosion of the gains of the in the reserve. My own suggestion would be that we must have a security system that preserves the life of the farmer on his farm so that it doesn't turn to become an IDP, by ensuring that we put in place a sustainable security system for the region and supporting the effort of the country, such as Nigeria that is facing insurgency right now as we're talking. Many farmers are in the IDP camps. How would they produce? How do we then have access for reserve? So that's a question for the whole House to assist Nigeria in that aspect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure it's only Nigeria that is facing that problem. The surrounding regions, including Niger, Chad, Cameroon, name it, they are all facing the same problem. I'm sorry for those others who may have some questions, but we are running late. The Honorable Minister has another engagement very soon, and I'm going to give her the opportunity to respond first to questions that were directed to her.
Thank you, Moderator. I'm going to try to talk about speak on 3 interventions. The first one on that we should be speaking of integration of African economy within the global economy. I think he has the whole point, because I mean we are now we are global citizens. We are open to the globalization, but in this discussion, we are just discussing how do we trade among African nations. I think that was the discussion around that we were talking about, but he has a whole point, and I think whenever we are talking all of these things, we are not limiting ourselves to the Africa, but we are trying to see that we have been trading with the rest of the world, but not among ourselves, and I think that's what we are trying to address. So I think agricultural policies, I don't think that any African nation is just limiting itself to whatever is consumed in Africa. And I think I addressed it before that the traditional exports to the rest of the world have been the coffee, tea, cocoa, and so on, because that's where the other economies were ready to process that and then feed the rest of the world, themselves and ourselves. But I mentioned that this is probably the time that we should be also looking at ourselves and be able to add value and sell to the rest of the world, being other economies or even our own economies. So the time, I think as the time goes and the knowledge increasing, the capital increasing, I think the time will come when we will be doing that. And in Rwanda, we used to speak of cash crops and food crops, but we no longer have those terminologies because anything today is tradable. So I think we shouldn't be just limiting ourselves to the old way of thinking. We should be really looking at what are our comparative advantages, what can we offer to the rest of the continent and the world, and then work on our comparative advantage and be able to make sense in the continental and the global economies. That's what I can say about that, but I think he makes a lot of sense, and we are sitting in a global context, but we are specifically discussing the specificities within Africa. So the other question was that 80% of the foods come from the women, and they have limited access to resources, being land and finance. I mean, she's right. But in a Rwandan context, probably people, being men and women, the access to land is, I mean, we have limited land, but when it comes to the family setting, we don't have issues of women not accessing land. So whatever is available is shared between men and women. So when we are registering our properties, it's 50% women and 50% men. So the issues of women not having access to land, to the family land, if it is existing, is not a big issue. But the finance issue, it's a big, big problem. And I think that's where all of the issues of de-risking agriculture, the financial inclusiveness, and probably some sort of social protection schemes to make sure that the people are having equal access to existing resources. Those are the policies in place to help, but still the issue of accessing finance, it's actually equally a big issue for everyone, not just for women, but when it comes to women, it becomes more visible because probably they have a limited mobility and negotiation powers, but it's still an issue for everyone.
For cutting you short, I think there's an important lesson here. It needs to be clear. You talk about when you are registering property, it's 50-50%, am I right? Now, before one marries, for example, he has some property. Will he be doing a double registration when he marries? Can you tell us how this works?
Yes, on a family basis. Actually, we have, I think, two marriage regimes where when you marry, you say we are sharing everything that, I mean, we put in common whatever we have been having. But also you can have an option of keeping what you had before getting married, and the woman keeps and the man keeps. But whatever comes after that, that you worked together, it becomes your common properties. So, I mean, we don't have, once you are married, we don't have places that you, I mean, the things that you worked for as a family, they are shared. So when they are registered, if it's a house or a land or something, all of us, you are on that title deeds. So it's hard to say, okay, this is for the woman and this is for the man. So I think, I don't know if that is the question, but it's all the time. The best practice and the culture has been like that. So access to land, it's equal to everyone. So we don't have, and the land in Rwanda is a private property. So we don't have like the land belonging to the state and then your chief will give you something if he wants or not. So it's a private property. So as a family, you have your own land and it's registered on you. And the other question was about the policies in place as the urbanization is coming up and the housing is taking more of the land that is meant for agriculture. That is a big, it's true, and it's a problem that we are having in Rwanda. we already have limited land, and urbanization is moving so quickly. So we see a lot of land being taken by the housing industry. But we are trying to deal with that. Probably, I don't know if it's the right time or if it's late to deal with that, but we are changing even our agricultural patterns. That used to be purely for subsistence, and you harvest 600 kilograms of beans and you feel it's all right. So moving forward, the policies are investing in the high-value commodities and productivity. That's one, the productivity by unit, as I mentioned before, investing in high-value commodities. Also adding value and shelf life increase. But also on the housing side, we are working on a rural settlement, changing, even the city housing changing. And I think this year we are starting an exercise working with the institution in charge of land to map, gazette, and protect agricultural land. So it's something that we haven't achieved yet, but we have started that because the threat is visible. So it's really visible, and we are taking specific actions, but you know, that happens when the urbanization is moving fast and the population is growing, so it's not avoidable that things like that happens, but it's important to look at it and take specific measures to address those. Thank you.
So much. The Honorable Minister has to go now. Can we give her another round of applause? Okay, now we are nearing the end, and I'm going to start from my immediate left, and we move to the end, and each person has a maximum of 2 minutes to respond to the questions that we are addressed to them.
A question addressed to me, so I would just say thank you once again, and I just leave you with one thing. I think it's best if we create a conducive environment for a better agriculture to thrive in Africa. Thank you so much.
Yeah, similarly, what I can just say is that to enhance commercial or intra-Africa trade, I think we really must increase production and value addition. That way, more recently we've seen that tilapia is being imported from China, and you wonder how that is possible because we have tilapia in our lakes. But someone recently said that maybe the Chinese just package it somewhere along in the ocean and bring us back the same fish that we have. So I think the point is that we really must up our game in terms of using modern methods of production so that we increase our production. And then, of course, I think if we do that, even we'll be able to address the SPS issues. Thank you.
I think the minister addressed a question that was raised by a professor here, a valid question on land and population. She answered it in the context of Rwanda, but in the context of Africa, it's very, very important. The classic example is Egypt, where you have a very limited agricultural land, and industry and housing has been competing with the land that is available. It's a very serious question. So I think in terms of how to increase production, we will have to rely on raising productivity per unit of land. That should be our main priority. Fortunately, I think the available and cultivated arable land is mainly in the Guinea savanna, which is less populated, so we have that potential as well. But definitely, Professor, your question is valid. We have to be very conscious about that. The other question in terms of how African agriculture fits in with the global trading mechanism is, I think, yesterday, Professor Collier emphasized that unless we have the scale, that's why I raised this question of scale, and we are producing agriculture competitively in a global context, we're going to have problems. So we have to be competitive, but we have the potential to be competitive because the technologies exist. It's a question of applying those technologies where we can produce agriculture competitively in a global context. So I think it is a valid question, but we should take it as we are producing agriculture production in that context. So we cannot get out of it.
Thank you. Just very briefly to add, I think as colleagues have said, Africa is actually the best continent in terms of water and land availability in the world. Some countries are very constrained, but in terms of the actual potential, the problem is that areas are far from with demand, which may often be coastal cities, which are very attractive, therefore, in terms of sourcing imports. And so I think we should be setting clear targets around cost competitiveness, around the production, the increased productivity of production in those areas, seed, fertilizer, the transport costs to get it to the urban areas, and the capabilities that are required to reach the scale, particularly at the processing level, and the kind of investment costs that are required. And we can choose those main benchmark products of the urban population. As I said, tilapia and poultry on the meat side, and you can work backwards to the animal feed, the fish feed, and you can measure where do we stand as a benchmark. And I think if we're not able to bring it to that level, then we will not be making the necessary steps. The last thing around the standards is this is an infrastructure of regional integration. Regions need to have the testing facilities, the application of the standards. If each country duplicates all of these centers that are required, it will be incredible waste of cost, duplication of cost, especially in the smaller countries. So to have the facilities available so that a farmer or a processor can go and simply test the product cheaply. And this is happening already to some extent, I know, in the East African community. And combine that with issues such as packaging and cold storage. The very practical things that you require to protect the product and put it onto the shelf of a retail outlet in a city. At that kind of level is where we need to move forwards. Thank you.
For me, the focus should be on few commodities that has a potential for cross-border trade along the regions. But what we see is what is critical is what each of the government, the measures that each of the government takes at a national level. We have government measures that are meant to increase production productivity, but that has been undermined by other policy measures that limits cross-border trade. So there is a need for a comprehensive national trade policy at a national level.
Thank you so much. Wonderful panel. It will be difficult to attempt summarizing what they have said, but I think we can have some takeaways in the last few minutes remaining for us in the panel. We've heard about some constraints. This relates to standards issues, safety issues, human capital knowledge issues. We've heard also about the informality of trade, which hinders their being captured in the trade data. We've also heard about how expensive it is to trade among ourselves, especially given the high A costs, in spite of other agreements, including the Yamoussoukro Open A agreement. We've also heard about the problem of infrastructure, which had also been discussed yesterday. We heard about over-reliance on outsiders to help us in the implementation of the arrangements that we have agreed to. Of course, the problem of smuggling across porous borders, we also heard about that. We've also heard that certain countries overprotect, as it were, their own products. In addition, we heard about the fact that most of the products we produce perish because of lack of storage facilities. And then we heard that some of the policies that are enacted at the national level are ad hoc in nature, and therefore need to be properly harmonized so that we will be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And we've heard that population growth is a time bomb in terms of food security in Africa. Related to that is the issue of climate change that makes food production volatile, makes prices also volatile in nature, as we have experienced recently. We have also heard about our colleague from the Kofi Annan Foundation says we have the technology. Maybe that is something we will take up and see whether we can harness technology available, be able to adapt what is available. In terms of remedies, we've had, what, for example, Rwanda is doing. Maybe I start with the last one we had. Particularly for those who want to come and marry here, so that they know that both men and women will have equal rights, both in access to all their property, in fact. And I think that's a good example if other African countries can emulate that, because most of the literature we talk about women's limited access to land, finance, etc. But I think we have a very good example here to emulate. And I think we also need to do something about the Yamoussoukro agreement in terms of implementation. We often talk about the political will. I don't know where we were going to buy this political will. I don't know whether there is a market somewhere in Africa where we can buy political will to be able to implement what we have agreed. So I think that is very important. And our friend Mustafa, gave us some guidelines on what we need to do going forward from here in terms of having targets, who to do what, monitor those targets as we go. But particularly for the private sector, I think the issue of incentives is very important because agriculture is risky, as we all know. And if you don't incentivize the private sector, you can never have them coming into the sector. And of course, this regional approach in terms of food conservation and preservation is also important. A friend from Nigeria had mentioned the example that West Africa is adopting, and I think that can be replicated in all the sub-regions so that most of the things we produce do not perish. And there could also be collaboration not only in that area but also in research and development. And of course, making this transparent policies that do not limit intra or cross-border trade. Ladies and gentlemen, I think these are some of the key issues that we were able to gather here. And possibly I will add de-risking the sector is important, just like the African Development Bank now is doing, helping countries by introducing mechanisms to de-risk investments in various areas. And I think it's very important in the area of agriculture, where, which is very risky because of climate change issues, because of natural disaster issues, irregular rainfall and all that. I want to thank panelists. Can we give them another round of applause? And another round of applause for yourselves. So, thank you very much. We have a photo session. Incidentally, the minister is not there, but we can ask one of our directors, Madam Muno, to come and join us.